Right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry to end the lovely chatter and conversations and all those lovely post-lunch conversations that you've been having. I'm going to get us started because we are running a little bit late and I do not want to encroach on Anne's time. I was just giving people enough time to come in from lunch so we weren't too interrupted for this session. So that's happened now. So Anne's going to talk until about 10 to 2 and then give you a good 10 minutes for question and answer with before you move to the next sessions just after 2 o'clock. So, good afternoon. Welcome to your second keynote. So you had your keynote panel with Professor Megan Crawford yesterday. And then this afternoon, you have one of our next two conference highlights. And I'm really, really, really delighted, almost kind of beyond delighted to tell you how terrific it is that Anne has managed to tie in her work through her other UK connections. So she's been to Scotland and come down with the Scottish team to BELMAS, which is absolutely. So they arrived yesterday afternoon. So for those of you who haven't heard Professor Anne Lopez speak before, Anne Lopez comes from Montego, Jamaica. And in October 23, I had the absolute privilege, just after having become BELMAS chair, of attending Professor Paul Miller's Institute for Education Leadership Jamaica conference with a couple of CCM colleagues who are also in the room. And to hear Anne talk on her home territory about race and education leadership in a room where I sat as a minority, as a white person, was terrific. It was one of the most empowering, thought-provoking sessions I have ever experienced. And I just looked at Anne talking and thought, we have to bring this to BELMAS. So that's what you're going to experience this afternoon. So I am super delighted to introduce Anne Lopez to you. You can hear that she's talking to you about a call to action, sustenance, determination, and hope in challenging times, which we were discussing with her very nicely fits our conference theme. And you are going to have a brilliant afternoon. Please welcome Anne.
Is this working? Okay. Alrighty, thank you so much, Deb. It's just a pleasure to be here. I know it's after lunch. It reminds me sometimes of high school. You know, when you have things after lunch, the students don't show up. You have to go fetch them from places beyond. Any high school teachers? But you're high school teachers. So we got it, but it's okay. We're at the point now where just being in space is an absolute pleasure and privilege. So before I begin to share some of the ideas that I want to bring into space, the call to action, some of the things that hopefully reflect on after the conference. I want to thank BELMAS for inviting me into space to say a few words. I have to say a special thanks to Deb. We have collaborated in the past and we have more to do. I also want to say a special thanks to Kelly Ruston and all of the organizing team. They have just an amazing job just answering emails, getting everything ready. Really, really want to say thanks. And I want to thank all of you for being here. Because it's one thing to be invited to speak, it's another thing to talk to yourself. So it's always important to have people to listen. Before I start, I also want to acknowledge a few folks, and I must acknowledge Ken O'Brien from the University of New Brunswick. And Ken, when I wrote my first book, created space for me to launch. And Ken told me yesterday that he's retiring, but I know he's not going too far, right, Ken? But I really wanted to acknowledge you. I also want to acknowledge my colleague from OISE, Joe Flesser. Joe and I work together. He's actually our associate dean. And he's also in the Education, Leadership, and Policy program. You didn't want me to tell anybody that, right? That's okay. But last but not least, I want to acknowledge my colleagues from the University of Glasgow. And I hope I get everybody's name right. Alison and Madeline and Julie, and where's Murray? Oh, over here. And not a University of Glasgow, but we met on the plane yesterday. I wanted to acknowledge my colleagues from the University of Glasgow because I was in space there in March, and they are doing such intentional work. And I am telling you, not for me to talk about Glasgow, what they're doing at University of Glasgow and the City Council of Glasgow, but just to say one thing, like Alison is leading the anti-racism work, just the boldness of calling something in 2025 anti-racism in of itself is boldness. And to do that, and really they're thinking through ways to bring more ethnic and racial minority into the headship. So that's the kind of work I was at Glasgow doing in March, went back just this week to OISE. So anyway, those are the thank yous. And of course, I understand that some folks are online who I might know and appreciate, but anyway, just want to say thank you. All right, so now I have to get the clicker. I should have. All righty. Who's going to keep me in time? Deb told you I'm originally from Jamaica, so we could be here all evening talking. They say point. Where did I think? There we go. Okay, so before I start, as you can see, I'm a Black woman. I'm not a confused, and I'm just a plain old Black woman. And that means a lot to me. And so I walk the world through the lens of Blackness. And I'll share a little bit about what that means for me and my positionality and the lens through which I think about things, the lens through which I engage in education, educational leadership, and so on. A little bit. Okay, there. Jesus. Oh, I have to learn some patience. Okay, so it's important for me. If I was in Canada, I would start with a land acknowledgement, acknowledging that we are on Indigenous people's land. We do that in Canada. It's not performative. We mean it, and we do it with all of the spirit in thoughts with our Indigenous colleagues. As a Black person stepping into space, it is important for me to acknowledge my African ancestry. It is so important in terms of what I do, who I am, part of my positionality. So I wish to acknowledge the labor of our African ancestors and the contributions they made and the continued contributions of their descendants in creating our current space in this country and across borders. I want to be mindful of the lineage and sacrifice of African people in the struggle for justice and liberation. I take this moment as an opportunity to pause, reflect, and to continue to educate myself on Black excellence in all aspects of society. And those words, I'm not saying them just because I want to say them. So first of all, I am here because my ancestors survived. This is not a session about speaking about enslavement, but to tell us to get over it because it was a long time ago is not a thing. The descendants of the enslaved carry the passion, the desires of our ancestors. It's also very important for us, the descendants, to connect with the continent of Africa because that's our roots. And that's so very important. One last thing I'm going to say about this acknowledgement, you'll notice two things quickly. B is capitalized in Black when you refer to Black people. Let today be the last day that you will ever write about Black people with a common B. You do not use a common A for Asians. You do not use a common letter for any other group, but folks continue to talk about Black people with a lowercase b. And that is part of how the positioning of how folks understand, sometimes consciously or unconsciously, the way they're positioning Black people and so on. The second thing I want to do quickly in that acknowledgement, for those of you who are educators in schools, where you're engaging with Black students, I encourage you, if you're doing that, when you see those Black children coming, say, look at the beauties of excellence coming towards me. Begin to consciously in your souls, when you see Black people in spaces, think of them in terms of excellence. When you walk into a building, think of that Black woman or that Black person in terms of excellence. Do not position us to the stereotypes to which they have constructed us. So that's so very important a message I'd like to leave with you. So we don't have a lot of time, so let me quickly move on. Told you I'm from Jamaica, and I heard somebody say dual citizenship. I'm also Canadian. I've been in Canada almost 40 years. So I'm more Canadian than I'm Jamaican, if that makes any sense. But anyway, a little bit, I talked about being a descendant of the enslaved. I'm an educator. I use that term instead of teacher, school leader, whatever else, designation, dean, associate dean, provost, whatever the formal role. We are educators. And if you see yourself as an educator, it means teaching and learning happens wherever you are. And we're going to talk about how you can't come to the university and do all of this talking about anti-racism, but in your daily lives, you forget it. It doesn't work that way. So as an educator, that's how I see myself. There's a philosophy that undergirds what I do, which is going to undergird the conversations I'm going to be having with you. It's grounded in diversity, equity, inclusion, and over the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years, decolonial and anti-colonial work. Because as I've been researching, teaching, engaging, I see the remnants of colonization that continues to be perpetuated. And many of us would say colonization is not over. It has just taken on a new form. So that's the lens through which my work is theorized. I'm a grandma, by the way, have some respect. Those are my beautiful grandchildren. They call me Grammy. And some of you might know who that person is. It's Marcus Mosiah Garvey. So you all have homework. If you have never read up on Marcus Garvey, please go read up about Marcus Garvey. And by the way, Bob Marley sang, "Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free the mind." Marcus Garvey said those words in Nova Scotia way back when. So he's also one of my guiding lights. So just a little bit about my scholarship, what I do, where I do research. By the way, I teach at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. And you can all Google all about OISE. So the kind of school leadership, and by the way, I started out as a teacher educator. I was the academic director of initial teacher education. I actually was hired at OISE to be in teacher education and then transition into leadership. So the research I do is really in what we call emerging economies, and you can give it some other term. But when I started teaching ed leadership, I became very uncomfortable with all of the articles being from Canada, England, Australia, Scotland, and that was it. Very little from other contexts. And so I applied for a grant, got it, and all of that. And so now I am very intentional about researching in Ghana, Zambia, Kenya, Jamaica. I still do some research in the Greater Toronto area, but those are the areas. These are just some of the articles that I've written recently. One is about Jamaica with my colleague Carmel Roof from the University of the West Indies. And the other one was a GEMS project with UNESCO, where I co-authored school leadership competencies in sub-Saharan Africa with my colleagues from VVOB in Rwanda. So just a little bit of the work that I'm doing and in terms of research and scholarship. Okay, so that's enough about me and what I do. All right, so the theme of this conference is turbulence, reform, and development in educational leadership, management, and administration. So we're gathered here in Brighton at a time when things as we know it, DEI is now a bad word, inclusion is a bad word. You know, we should take all the people who are talking about DEI, we should say to them, okay, since you do not want to do DEI, never ever use a wheelchair ramp. You are going to not be allowed to use it since you are so against DEI. So we are indeed in turbulent times, and BELMAS is happening at that time. And I was really intrigued by the theme of the conference. So what I want to posit into space are not sort of answers, But I hope that when I'm done, that you'll walk away thinking through how you are going to position your leadership work within the times in which we find ourselves. What are the shifts that you're going to make? How are you going to think differently about your research? How are you going to think differently about the ways in which you engage with students? If you're a head teacher, how are you going to think differently about how you engage with communities and so on and so forth? So I just want to share some of the realities that we are experiencing. So we are seeing more poverty. Extreme poverty is on the rise. Countries afflicted by conflict, instability, people are hungry, according to the World Bank. With that on the rise, there's a demographic shift. So the West is seeing more people coming to the UK, to Scotland, to Canada, to the United States from countries where they're experiencing poverty. Well, in my anti-colonial world, it's almost as if colonization is reaping what it sowed. Because if you think about all of the extraction of resources that has gone on the continent of Africa for hundreds of years, in some ways, it's very interesting. I got that from the BELMAS website, and that's really the idea that in 2025, we are now saying that we have to remind people that education matters. And when we're talking about education, we're talking about public education, because that's where many of us were educated. Of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion is now a bad thing. It's really being weaponized. If you look at what's going on in the United States, all of the programs to support DEI are being taken away. And I'll just quickly say something about DEI. Diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives were brought into place to correct the historical wrongs of exclusion. I'm wondering, and this is a wondering, if, however, those of us who have been advocating doing this work for a long time made it seem as if only Black and brown people were going to benefit. But in fact, diversity and equity and inclusion education doesn't benefit all kids. And in fact, it does. It's good teaching, it's good leading, because when all kids are uplifted, we all should be happy. And so I'm wondering if the way we talked about it, as if we were taking something from someone, giving something to someone else without spending that time to explain in greater details. But anyway, it is what it is. And one of the things hopefully you will reflect on as educational leaders is how we are going to continue to do this work. So those are some of the invitations. The other thing I want to quickly share or for us to consider, hate is now being centered as a core leadership construct. Hate. And do not fool yourselves or ourselves. Whatever happens in the construct and the space of the United States travels globally. So when I go to wherever I go, there are people who are talking about anti-woke. This is so woke. They're not even quite sure what woke means, but they know what anti-woke is. This is really where we find ourselves. To me, this is the example of the turbulent times we're in. So my invitation to you as you leave this conference, when you think about leadership within your own context, what are the constructs, the conceptualizations that you are using to define your leadership praxis? What is it that you're going to foreground? Because here we have the leader of, I wouldn't call it the free world, but it's some kind of world, really embellishing in hate. What we have also noticed is that cruelty is now a leadership praxis. Cruelty. Those are children, starving children in Gaza being shot while they're trying to get food. It doesn't matter where you are on this earth. Your humanity should not so leave you that starving children becomes your enemy. It doesn't matter where you are. And we have this woman. She is a friend of the current occupant of that space. And they've just created something they've called alligator Alcatraz. Have you read up on that? And if you haven't, you should. And that is where they're planning to put people that they think do not belong. What society on earth, you tell me as a leader, you're modeling cruelty, where you're going to build someplace, and if the only escape, alligators will eat you, and then you have your minions tweeting, alligator lives matter. The good news is alligators are guaranteed 65 million meals if we get started now. That's where we're at. I'm not talking about last year. I'm talking about last week. So as educational leaders, when those children come into your schools and into your spaces, if they happen to be come from one of those families that they're suggesting alligators eat, how are you as educational leaders going to address that? Or are we going to continue to pretend that we're doing reform, but we're not naming anything? What is it that we're going to charge ourselves to do? So these are the turbulent times. This is where we're at. I'm going to give you 30 seconds just to sit for a moment. Maybe just turn to somebody else. How are you feeling? How are you feeling in these times? Just turn to somebody. What are you feeling? And when you get up every day, turn on the news, listen to all of this because we are bombarded with it daily. How are you feeling? We don't have a lot of time, because we have to end at 10 to 2. But anybody quickly want to share? Just briefly, I'll run to you with the mic. It will add to my 10,000 steps desire. Anybody just quickly want to share what you're feeling? Anybody quickly? Okay, bad, Sad, yes, sad. Painful, thank you. And those are the emotions our students are feeling. Those are the emotions in our communities. And I'm going to move on. But we now have merchandise that says alligator Alcatraz. We have people spending money to buy that. For me, I feel sad too, because it is a level of dehumanization. We are being almost desensitized. It is quite a scary place, but let us move on. We're not without hope. So in all of this, then, in all of this turbulence, in all of that sort of space, in all of that discourse and narrative, I want to ask you two questions. How do educational leaders navigate this terrain locally and globally? I caught the end of a session this morning and they were talking about school leadership in contexts. And contexts are not the same. There are differences and so on. But how are you dealing with this? What does school leadership theorizing, research praxis looks like given these current realities? What are you going to focus on? How are we going to think through this, work through this? I was talking with a colleague at ISAT 2 days ago, and she's from Florida at a particular university. I will not say which one, just to honor the relationship. And I said, how are you managing? And she says, we just have to find now alternative words. For example, instead of saying diversity, good for all. So they literally have to spend time to go through their course outlines and all those kinds of things to find words to replace the DEI, the equity, and so on. The other thing she mentioned, They are now scanning course outlines and have bots to look for words. Can you imagine working in that environment? But that's what our colleagues are dealing with. So it's an invitation. We don't have time to go through all of this now, but we no longer can we go to conferences and just go to conferences, share our paper, we go on to write the next one because we're all going for tenure or whatever it is that we're doing. Because you know something? How many members in the community ever read your paper? How many people in the community outside of academia read your last piece? Anybody? So who are we writing it for? So no, I haven't shared mine either, really. It's bringing me to think about what are we doing with that work? You know, so again, an invitation to think about seriously after this conference as educational leaders, ways in which we can think through this. So I want to share with you what I call some ponderings and possibilities. These are just some ideas grounded in some research, and hopefully we can have some conversations. We can have a little bit of time, and maybe we do that through the Q&A. So the first thing you will see is determination, and that was in the title of my talk. But I also want to put beside that disrupting the resilience discourse before I even go any further. Resilience has almost become a cottage industry of research. Everybody is researching resilience. And I spent some time reflecting on it. So my entry point to the resilience work, fine, if you want to do resilience, go ahead. But my entry point as someone whose educational work, my lived experiences, is about challenging all forms of oppression, do not encourage children to be resilient in the face of oppression. This whole resiliency bit, what you're going to tell Black people to work harder? Really? No, Black women are working as hard as we can. If we work any harder, we will not be here. And so it is so important, and I want to leave this with you, to critically reflect on this resilience discourse and how and where it is being used. Or the other side of that is complimenting people who are from marginalized communities for their resilience. It's like complimenting a Black person because they're so articulate. And you know why you shouldn't do that, right? I was saying that I said, if anybody doesn't know why they should do that, I'll have a session in the lunchroom, in where we have thing. So think about it. Think about the praising of people who are suffering forms of oppression, and all we can tell them is how great and resilient they were at navigating oppression. What we should be doing is advocating for the systems of oppression to be dismantled, so people do not have to be that resilient. So if your curriculum is only citing certain people from certain places and certain ideas, I have had students come to me and say, that curriculum is nothing but trauma. It is perpetuating the pain of my lived experiences, either by what the professor refuses to acknowledge or the knowledge that is excluded. So rather than writing and researching all this stuff about resiliency and you have all your things in ways that people should be resilient, when you're talking about and to people where our history is embedded in oppression and exclusion and marginalization, we say no thank you for the resiliency discourse. What we would like to have the discourse around are ways in which we can change the structures that oppress so that we do not have to be so resilient. But anyway, so that's what I want to say about resiliency. So in terms of some ponderings and possibilities to navigate these turbulent times, I am suggesting now that when you leave this conference, you should have at least 2 people, 3 people, where you're going to begin to think through differently how you're going to navigate and talk back to. Because there's no way we can pretend, if we're just thinking about humanity, that alligator Alcatraz is okay, that cruelty is a form of leadership and hate is something that we should all come to understand. No. So we're going to have to be prepared to talk back to the rise of anti-democratic forces that are seeking to undermine public education, uphold the status quo built on injustice and exclusion. You know, making spaces great again, and I won't put the word, but anybody that's trying to make great again, what exactly are you trying to make great again when in fact that history is so painful? So as Gore and Drysdale argue, educational leaders must not only decide what is important, but how these factors are fundamentally shaping education. So when you leave BELMAS, you should have a notebook. I am very tactile, I like my notebook. You should have a notebook, something that you're writing down, that you're thinking about ways in which, in your little context, that you're going to use to talk back to some of the issues. Is it through the writing? Is it poetry? Is it drama? Is it research? Is it the grant? What is it? How are you going to do that? And by the way, there, as I talk about that, I have a pet peeve about conferences. So, including myself, so many of us walk with this tag. We never say hi to another person we don't know, rarely. We just walk by each other, see the tag and keep it moving. I'm included in that as well. So I'm critiquing myself. And because we can't do this work unless we are in community. We don't have to be in immediate community, but as a field, we have to be in collaboration, in conversation, in community. So I urge you, when we're done today at 2:00, walk up to somebody that you have not spoken to, find out where they're from, why they're here, and just have a 1-minute conversation and meet a new person. And by the way, if when you say ask somebody where you're from, in Canada, it's highly loaded. So we do not ask people where they're from, because when you ask folks where they're from, it sounds like you think they don't belong. So how I have encouraged my students and how I've done it now is to say, tell me about the land of your ancestry. And it opens up quite a space for me to tell you what I'm comfortable sharing with you. So all of those are the things that we do. So when you leave, I'm encouraging you to think about how are you going to talk back. Anybody here work in a situation where they're being monitored, they're being challenged? If you feel vulnerable to share, where your course outlines, you can't kind of do the kind of research that you've been doing? Pardon? Okay, sure. Come on, let's be collaborative.
Thank you for this question. I think the question is, I'm just trying to reframe it, because I guess the majority of us are working in censored environment, highly surveyed. A lot of our critical work is now viewed as uncomfortable to the organization. So I guess the question, who isn't in this circle?
And so if you're not working in uncomfortable places, then you have a job to do to support those who are working in those spaces. Anybody not working in uncomfortable spaces where your organization is monitoring you? I would say we're half and half, Joe. What you say? Yeah, Joe and I work in a half and half. We're from Canada, so we do double in coffee. So we're kind of meaning that we have agency, we have latitude, but there are larger organizational things that we must take into account. Am I getting it right, Joe? Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, go ahead. Oh, no. Oh, let's talk.
Okay, so I'm doing my doctorate at the moment with the University of Buckingham, and it's been in the firing line quite a lot over the last few years for being pro free speech. There you go, there's the irony of that.
Wow. So even speech is being attacked. So it's interesting. So therefore, what I'm suggesting, that we cannot take things for granted. We're going to have to intentionally work and plan at how to talk back. Really, we're in a new phase. We're going to have to strategize. We can't just theorize. Long are the days when we just theorize. We're going to have to strategize. You know, we talk about, we see evidence of that every day. And I do not want to relive a particular kind of election, but just imagine if all the people who had theorized had just strategized. So the second thing I'm suggesting, another idea, is courageous leadership. And that is not new, but really to rethink what your courage might mean. And so drawing on Carol Mullen's work, bringing justice, healing, freedom to Black and brown people, we could put all other ways in which people are marginalized there, demilitarizing of neighborhoods in an uppermost responsibility, recognizing the educational leadership community, even while faced with rebuilding lives and communities that have been completely disrupted. And I share this courageous leadership because I don't know how many of you are following along, but I was reading about 3 weeks ago about a principal in Los Angeles who would not allow the authorities to come into his school. So that is Los Angeles. But in other places, the invitation I'm putting to you as one of the things we're going to do when we leave this conference is reflect on your courageous leadership. What does that mean? And these things are not linear. They're interrelated, they're connected. So I literally could draw a Venn diagram. Because notions of courage are varied. And in this moment, we are positioning courage as a willingness to take risks, speak back to power, challenge forms of oppression. And there's a vulnerability that goes hand in hand as well to be courageous. So here's the practical piece of this that I'm asking you to reflect on. Is in your practice, in your research, in your teaching, head teacher, assistant head teacher, principal, dean, associate dean, a faculty member, wherever the context you find yourselves, is do not sit in inaction in this moment. Think about what it is that you can do. Think about where you can find agency to be courageous. What does that look like? Who else do I need to talk to? Who do I need to collaborate with? All of that is so important. And keep in mind your own vulnerabilities. I am not suggesting that you do things that your spirit can't handle. Do things that you think your spirit can handle. But your spirit will never be able to handle things unless you engage with your spirit. That is your soul, the thing that moves you. Because we're not just technocrats. There has got to be something in your soul that fights injustice. There's got to be something deep down that make you want to do the work that we do, that make us so uncomfortable with seeing children hungry that we're moved. So we're not machines. So, but the invitation is do not leave this conference without your action plan. I have 5 seconds. So Lassiter suggests, and I'll take 5 minutes out of the Q&A, suggests that courageous leadership is willful, intentional. You have to make mindful deliberations, take risks. We've talked all about that. So I'm going to give you some questions to ponder based on the theme of this conference. What exactly do you mean by reform then in your context? What are you going to reform? Is that the right word? What it is that you're trying to change in educational leadership and management? What is it? When you go back and talk with your doctoral students, are you going to continue to use those same words? And write the research and draw upon the same extant literature? Or are you going to ask new questions and generate new readings? We have to begin to generate new knowledge in the field, built on critical notions, built on the talking back. We're in a moment, and we better get fast at it. I'm slow with the writing these days, but we better get really quick to produce and generate that knowledge. How might your research, teaching, and scholarship look different? You should not be leaving this conference going back to the same old, same old. And so finally, how do we sustain this work? We do not have a lot of time to go into details, but I'm suggesting authentic collaborations, well-being, collaborative mentorship, and developing a critical action plan. What do I mean by authentic collaborations? Collaborations that move beyond the extraction of data. Mary, you and I were talking about that just yesterday. So if you're in a university and you're working with a school community or a school board, are you just showing up to extract data? Or are you showing up to participate in real meaningful change? What are you showing up there for? And by the way, do not go into those spaces and call yourself an academic and the people there practitioners. They're not your practitioners. They construct theory every day. Any head teacher who has had to lovingly redirect a child just created theory on how to do discipline differently. Every head teacher who's really thought about ways to engage students are daily constructing theory. Stop calling ourselves academics. Let's get rid of that colonial thing and really positioning schools as the field and practitioners. And in universities, the practitioners at the bottom, we just call them when we need to get some practical things. But we are just going to be here theorizing, So this authentic relationship, do not go into schools just to extract data. Go there to build lasting, meaningful relationships. Disrupt those hierarchies. Let your head teachers and your assistant heads and your principals know that they are collaborating equally in the research. When last did you discuss the research questions with the head teacher? Do you discuss the research questions with the head teacher? Anyway, know what you don't know. So moving along, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the well-being. We all know what that is. Rest is resistance. Katina Pollock from Western University writes a lot about work intensification, more things on people's plate, challenging homework life, emotional draining contexts. But rest is really resistance. So I'm asking you now, where we're at in this moment, in these turbulent times, your body and soul needs rest. Your mind needs rest. Because the capitalist grind will have head teachers and principals believe that if you're not in that school from 6 a.m. until 11 at night, you're not doing a good job. No more. No more. And experienced head teachers, stop modeling that nonsense. Do not do it to those who are new to the role. You cannot sustain it. Rest is resistance. And by the way, you're not paid for all those hours. If you were to look at your paycheck after taxes taken out and the hours you put in, you realize you're not making minimum wage. So the point is really we have to rethink, and how speaking back is speaking back to those ideas. So rest is resistance. Collaborative mentorship is something that was out of my own PhD work way back when, but it's still so important because mentoring relationships are so important in educational leadership as more senior folks mentor new folks into the field and so on to the profession. It's about co-laboring. It's about co-laboring, and we can talk more about that at another time, but it's really when you're engaged in these mentoring relationships with colleagues, with those who are new to your context, it shouldn't be a protege expert relationship, but a co-laboring and honoring of knowledge and so on and so forth. The last thing I'm going to suggest that you think about, you need to have a critical action plan. And that is so important, bringing all of it together. What actions can be taken? When you leave here, everybody gets homework. As a matter of fact, I think the next BELMAS conference should be built around the feedback from this conference on what you have tried, what you didn't work, and how did you talk back to the times we're in. That should be the next conference. And instead of having papers, we get into groups and small groups and discuss strategies. We learn from each other and we build again for the next time. How does that sound? But anyway, so we need to have critical action plan, know who our allies are, your critical friends. We don't have time to go into this, but in many spaces I go, and I speak particularly to those who self-identify as white, who are really interested in doing the work. They say, we want to do the work, but I really don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't know what to do. And we were having a conversation last night. Have your critical friends that you ask. And I'm going to end this. People say, are you going to talk about your hair? I'm going to use my hair as an example. This is my natural long dreadlocks. Do not compliment me on my braids. And so somebody might look at my hair and like, is it real? Is it not real? And that goes on for, I don't know. I can see people trying to talk to me, but but they don't know how to ask me. So you have to learn how to ask people who are different from you questions that you want to know to build relationships. So how do you do that? Tell me about your hair. You just have to figure out how to ask the question. Help me understand where you're coming from, your land of your ancestry, and so on. So know what you don't know your limits. And the last thing I'm going to say, keep the focus on the system. Because there are ways in which sometimes this work is presented in an individualistic way, that I'm doing good in my area. Lisa Murkowski yesterday reminds me of that. Maybe we should put leadership as individualism as a leadership construct. She came out of that thing, bill, and because she got what she thought she wanted for Alaska, she just said, okay, the rest don't matter. It was the highest form of individualism. So you might be doing okay in your place. You might have a director of education that really likes you, working to you, appreciates your work, but keep in mind that others might not have that. And so to wrap up, I always like to end with hope and possibility because I'm my grandmother's daughter and granddaughter, and she's the reason I'm standing here. I see hope as agency and I see hope as resistance. I speak about this and I've written about it now in the Journal of School Leadership. Educational leaders must be courageous. We must use their leadership agency to know what we will not be complicit in, what you will not be silent about, and what you will advocate for. What are you going to be silent about in your school? Which child or children you think do not deserve your love and care, or your voice, or your advocacy? So finally, we all will continue to learn, unlearn, and relearn, and continue to be in community. I thank you so much for listening. Do we have time? We're going to steal a few minutes out of the next thing. You know, lunch stole a few minutes. And listen, you know, I used to say, oh, you know, this is not life and death. We can take a few minutes quickly. Anybody have one or two questions or comments for me? It's okay, say it.
Thank you. Honestly, since yesterday and now, again, what you just said, you made me rethink what even I wrote for the presentation, which is going to be in the next hour. And it's really interesting because we are rethinking our things and renaming things. And you just made me a little bit doubting if people already attended your presentation and then they will come to mine. They might start arguing that. So whoever will be doing the presentations after you are really going to into big trouble.
Listen, that's okay. That's okay. You come in and you be vulnerable and you share where you want to think. Because, you know, presentations change you as you're going into the room. We rewrite them all the time on the plane. Then we rewrite them on the bus. Then we rewrite them in the room. Then you rewrite it at breakfast. Anybody does that? And then it's okay. It's okay. Anyone else for one last one?
Thank you. Just a question or a reflection, I guess, is how many people would be prepared to step aside from their current role if it meant to enable the change for the system? Because I think the resistance to change is often from within, because people realize if the change does come, they might appoint somebody in their team to make it more diverse, but still hold on to their own range of power, I guess.
That is a challenge, because the way education is set up in most places, the gatekeepers are given jobs for life. And so it's really hard to do that. So here's how I enter that space, is really to find ways of working through and with. And the technique I use is the questioning approach. I try not to point fingers, but to say to that person who's been there for 25 years, telling you that this is how it has always been done, you know, that person, And so you'll have to say, literally train yourself. This work is not ad hoc. You have to train yourself to say, okay, so help me understand how this is helping the new crop of grade 9s that we have. Help me understand how this is building healthier relationships with communities. And you might be lucky where those folks realize that the knowledge they bring into space is not advancing the cause of student success. Remember, center students. You know, if a child is being marginalized, they're not experiencing success. So hopefully, maybe some will leave, but if they won't leave and you can't make them go, then you're going to have to strategize how not to compromise what you're going to be complicit in, be silent about, or advocate for. And when I was a vice principal, I told a principal once, she wanted to suspend a Jamaican kid and wanted me to come in and speak in my Jamaican language to soften the thing. And I said, no, you're going to have to find somebody else. It won't be me. So, you know, there are times when you can also advocate for that, but you have to know your context. You have to strategize. Don't wing it. Plan. Make sure you script everything. Write everything down, because these days our words will be used as a weapon. So you do not say anything unless you write it down. You know, don't just go off the cuff. You know what I mean? There are strategies. Okay, one more and then we have to go. If not, we're going to be in trouble.
Thank you. Please, you need to pardon my accent. I'm from Nigeria, and I'm happy to be in BELMAS this year. Yesterday at my session, I spoke about reshaping educational leadership in turbulent times, student perspectives on decolonial leadership in Nigeria and South Africa. And it was Bethany Kelly, who chaired that session, and Luzani from South Africa was also there, and some other people, and it was very engaging. For me, I didn't even know that a topic, you're working on decoloniality. In Nigeria, when I discussed it with some of my people there, I discovered that topic met a lot of resistance, because they're like, how do you want us to decolonize? You know, because we've lived our lives practically, but I discovered that the African knowledge epistemology is not there. The ontology, the epistemology of we having our own identity. I'm not saying that, you know, we should forget about our history. I'm not saying that we should, you know, we should not appreciate what the Europeans have done for us, but we should have a kind of African voice in the way we think, in the way we see ourselves, having a form of identity, connection, that our students will be able to connect to their roots. And for me, I think it is very important. So coming yesterday, I felt, how will I share that idea in our session? I hope I will not be attacked. But Bethany and Luzani and other people that were there, you know, embraced that topic, and it was quite engaging. I'm happy I'm here today. Thank you.
Let's celebrate her. And let's draw on your happiness. Really appreciate you bringing that into space. Just some things to think about as you're wrestling within your own context of Nigeria, why some Nigerians will not embrace decolonial ways of thinking. Number one, I would encourage you to read Linda Tuhewi Smith's work, where it's called Decolonizing Methodologies, where she talks about decolonization. It's not just throwing everything away, but thinking about new knowledges, new ways, and that will give you some other ways to think about the Nigerian context. She's a Maori indigenous scholar from New Zealand. The other thing I'm going to say to you, make sure you read the work of Fanon. Make sure you read, yes. So you can't do Amos is there, because what colonization did, my sister, it did not just take the land, it took the mind. And it's not just in Nigeria, it's Ghana, it's Jamaica, it's everywhere where what colonizers did, they ensured that the colonized came to understand and love the values and histories of the colonizer. Remember, and then what did they do? They put an education system in place that just kept it going. So when the colonizers wrote the history, they never wrote the history of the colonized. They wrote the history of the colonizers. That's why let's take names. Let's just start with names, where people on the continent and other places were given names that people could say. It happens in Asia and other places as well. The first way to take away your identity is to take away the name, your tribal name, because your name is your identity, and then they took the language. So on the continent, in many places, students would be so well understand in their tribal languages and other languages, and then have to process in a third additional language of English. And then put an education system in place that say you can't go to university until you pass English. I've been in Kenya where teacher candidates are processing in the tribal language, processing in Swahili, and then trying to process in English before something comes out of the mouth. So the point I'm making is decolonial work is so important because we've got to decenter Eurocentricity in all of its forms. The knowledge, the education system, the knowledge that is foregrounded. The fact that, Gugu Wethanga from Kenya, who just passed, he wrote Decolonizing the Mind. He was sent to prison for speaking his local language in Kenya back in the 80s. So, decolonizing work, therefore, is really slow work to work with the mind of the people, to really begin to value their own indigenous language, ways of knowing. I'm going to make one quick example and then we have to end. I was at a conference quickly where a teacher, she was a university lecturer, I think, and she was working with grade 11 students teaching chemistry and the reaction. And the kids couldn't get it because oftentimes spaces import knowledge from the West that doesn't fit the context of the children. And so there's no engagement, there's no connection. Anyway, she decided she was going to use cassava, how cassava, so any of you know cassava called yucca, how it engages with water to show the chemical reaction. And she actually took the kids in the community to show, to have them grate the cassava, do all of that thing, and then they write up about chemical reaction, rather than some theory from the West. And they were all fine. I grew up in Jamaica. My grandmother told me that when you grate cassava, you must put it in water. Do you all know that? You have to soak cassava in water before you eat it, cook it, or boil it. Nobody in Jamaica has ever died from cassava because the indigenous knowledge is passed down. There's a chemical reaction. So there's so much indigenous knowledge that's there that could engage the children. Can you imagine just if in Toronto we teach Black kids about the history in the continent before the slave ships? We'll have to come back for another day because we didn't come from the bottom of a slave ship. We came from greatness, but the teachers don't know the greatness to teach. So the kids do not get that. So that's what you're talking about, my sister. It's not just in Nigeria, it's Jamaica, it's Ghana, it's Zambia, but we're not going to give up. We're going to produce the work. We're going to support the teachers. We're going to have the conversation. I was in Zambia and they were talking about indigenous knowledge, indigenous languages. So I know sometimes it's hard, but don't give up. Yes, you have a job to do. Thank you all so much.